trivial part of their priorities. Their priorities have just gone to pot as far as Jewishness is concerned. They are more concerned in being Democrats and in being radicals, which is quite fun, and coming down against Bush, coming down, God forbid, against Trump, which I think is symptomatic of a lack of understanding of what their priorities should be. The priorities should be to support the state of Israel. The priorities, they don't have to be Trump supporters, but they surely should not be calling him a Nazi and calling him an anti-Semite when the man has done more for Israel than any president in history.
Isi, you've written about the devastating impact of American non-Jewish Jews. What do you mean by this term?
Non-Jewish Jews, people who consider themselves, and I use the expression, cultural Jews, whatever that means, but have no culture, have no Jewish culture, because their grandparents, if they were Bundists, they may have been atheists and anti-Jew, anti-religious, but they had a passionate Jewishness. And at the later stage, they even moved closer towards supporting Israel. But these Jews today are so far away from understanding what their Jewishness is, and what makes it more complicated is the levels of intermarriage have become astronomical. And in this context, you have Jews of mixed marriage, and the children are now calling themselves Jews, but they're no more Jewish than the man around the world who calls himself, anyway, whatever it is. They're not Jewish because they don't know what it is to be Jewish. Put aside halakha, they're just not Jewish because they don't have any Jewish roots. The real trouble with the diaspora today is they have a combined factors going against them. They have a rise of anti-Semitism, unparalleled. We all thought anti-Semitism went away after Auschwitz, but we've seen how desperately wrong we were. But this oldest hatred remains still and will remain part and parcel of Western civilization. We've seen the Europeans turn against us and turn against Israel in a terrible way. They all pay homage to the Holocaust, but when it comes to Israel, apart from some lip service, they have turned against us in a terrible way. And now you have an American president who's been doing what we wanted, what we've prayed for, and the Jews in America are the ones who have turned more strongly against him than their non-Jewish, their Gentile counterparts. It's a horrible thing, and as I say, it's a reflection of Jewish assimilation, which has ended up turning Jews against themselves. We had it in the Middle Ages. You had Jewish apostates who turned against the Jews. Now, some of them, I don't say all of them, are coming very close to it. And I must say, I believe that if you had a real Gallup poll amongst American Jews, those who had the slightest element of Jewishness in them would turn out to still be pro-Israel, more so than their leaders who are desperate to show how they're progressive and not on the side of the angels. And you've got organizations like the Conference of Jewish Organizations, which used to speak up on behalf of Israel, which is now dumb to a large extent, and about to appoint a president from an organization which has been amongst the most extreme anti-Israeli elements in the Jewish community. Now, we have to be tolerant, and we should indulge in dialogue, but any mainstream Jewish organization must recognize that they cannot take up a situation which negates the security interests as expressed not only by the democratically elected government of Israel, but as expressed by the majority of Israelis, because by far the majority of Israelis are in support of Trump's policies and would like to see Trump re-elected, not because they like Trump, but because he's been good to the Jews.
Alan, I'll just ask one more question before I think we'll go to the audience for questions. Is that okay?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. Isi, you've written about the perils facing Anglo Jewry. The British Jews have never had a great reputation for being forthright in their support for Israel. So has anything changed in the United Kingdom, or do British Jews prefer to keep remaining stum?
Look, there was a president of the Board of Deputies preceding the current one who was a tremendous change and who stood up to British anti-Semitism. The current group pay respect to people, can you believe this, who said Kaddish for Hamas killers. Now, if that doesn't answer the question, it should. They have decided to stay on the fence now and not criticize their government for being anti-Israel, nor support the Israeli government, which is better than some of the American Jews. I say some of the left-wing American Jews, but I believe that the British have always been trembling Israelites, and I'm afraid that that may come to apply to most diaspora Jews who are not Orthodox or not committed to Israel.
Okay, well, just before we go to questions, I will ask one of my own, Isi. There's a bit of comment on the chat group about J Street and the New Israel Fund. I know what your views are on these two organisations, but perhaps tell everybody how you view these organisations, and do you think they're doing much damage to the Jewish cause?
Look, these organisations are left-wing. They give to some very legitimate, good charities, but they also support Arab groups which are struggling to create a one-state solution, which is going to mean the end of the Jewish state. And to this extent, I think that they are very negative. You have a lot of Jews that say we support Israel, but, and they're one of the Jews that support Israel, but are prepared to support and finance anti-Israeli governments and take up positions against the Israeli government, publicly condemning them. If they did it privately amongst themselves, we're all entitled to our private opinions. And believe me, here in Israel, we have lots of opinions. They're all expressed. Although the majority of Jews in Israel today, that's the point I want to make. The majority of Jews in Israel today, by far the majority, support this unity government with all its faults and weaknesses.
Okay. We'll take some questions. If you want to ask a question, please either send me a note on the chat or wave or catch my attention somehow. And then I'll ask you to unmute yourself, ask your question and remute yourself. Now, I think the first question we've got is from Morris Klein. Morris, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Thanks, Alan. Firstly, Isi, I'd like to thank you. Since the boys have decided to have a hiatus, you've had a number of interviews with Michael that I've been able to present on Shabbat Shalom in Jair. Simply outstanding. I think you might have answered my question in part. Isi, in Australia, we've been voting for our candidates for the World Zionist Congress. I want to ask you about some hard left, some say, I say, groups that have been lobbying to represent Australia. Under the name of Hatikva, these groups, including the New Israel Fund, as well as other left-wing Jews such as Mark Baker and Ron Finkel, are proposing a candidate who worked alongside Richard Falk, a la Goldstone report, in his capacity as a UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory. This person also worked with the anti-Zionist group B'Tselem. Is this one of the problems we have with diaspora Jews? Don't we have enough enemies ourselves?
Look, as I said, I'm not getting into Australian politics, but insofar as they are part of a global movement that does this sort of activity, I fully endorse what you say. The World Zionist Congress, by the way, elects democratically anybody that calls themselves a Zionist or is affiliated. And to this extent, Australia is not having an election, and it's done by agreement, and there's very little you can do about it. But I think that you should be willing to speak up when these groups say things which are contrary to Israel, and I believe that the leaders of the Jewish community and the Zionist movement do not agree with these extreme left-wing groups.
Thank you.
Okay, Anthony Cohen, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Isi. Nice to see you again. I'm originally from Perth, Western Australia. Isi, it just appears to me that you've got a situation that is developing now right throughout the world, and particularly the Western world, where some of the Jews are, that many of them are not finding comfort in living where they are. And I see that last year, Israel had just over 30,000 immigrants, and this year it expects to double that with what is going on. Do you think, with what's going on and your knowledge of South America and Western Europe, that a lot more Jews are going to make Aliyah?
Yes, but I think one of the reasons more Jews are going to make Aliyah is because they're going to discover that their children, when they go to university or when they go to colleges in Europe, in America, and I believe this much I can say because it's a fact, Australia, are going to find vicious anti-Israel and anti-Semitic elements coming to the fore. I think the fact that this has got to such a high level in America without proper intervention, with having Jewish academics in America leading the pack against Israel, all of these things suggest that Aliyah is the only solution. It's not just anti-Semitism, but it's assimilation, loss of identity, but above all, feeling that you have to become anti-Israel if you're going to be accepted in progressive society. And progressive society in most parts of the world are what comprises the universities and these elements. And this is a very serious problem. It's a heartbreaking problem. And the problem is further complicated by the cost of Jewish day schools. And here I can say Australia's magnificent in the Jewish day schools. But I know that lots and lots and lots of Jews simply cannot afford to send their children to Jewish day schools. Whereas here in Israel, it's an axiom, schooling and Jewish schooling. Whether you want religious or secular or whatever, any kind, is free. So I'm hoping more people come to Israel because if they want to be Jews, rather than being forced out because of anti-Semitism. But I fear that both of them will have an impact in many parts of the world, especially Europe.
Yes, if anybody wants to ask a question, there's a little icon down at the bottom called reaction, and if you click on that, you'll get a chance to wave to me electronically. So if you do that, I'll know that you want to ask a question. But Isi, you've had a lot to do with Jewish communal organisations, particularly in America. And I remember on Nothing Left, you were speaking about the Anti-Defamation League and saying how it was such a great organisation under Abraham Foxman. But this has now changed, hasn't it? What do you think when you see the way some of these Jewish communal organisations, where they're going?
When you see the ADL has been taken over by a fellow who worked for President Obama, was one of his real political sidekicks. He's taken that over. And whereas Abe Foxman, many people accused him of being too liberal, I always knew that Abe Foxman, bottom line, loved Jews and would always do the right thing in the last resort, although we had differences. But he was a great guy. And the Anti-Defamation League was a highly respected group to Today, the Anti-Defamation League has transformed itself into an extension of the Democratic Party and has indulged in polemics with the with the Republicans, which are disgusting. It has hinted at identification with those who condemn the president as being, God forbid, a Nazi, and all of these things. And today, they are, I believe, creating anti-Semitism amongst conservatives who cannot appreciate how a Jewish organization can use their Jewishness for these purposes. That's not to say that people who are against Obama, politically speaking, are anti-Semitic. God forbid. But there is a growing element in the Democratic Party, which is a growing element, and they are anti-Semitic, and they are a danger.
Yeah. I just want to ask David Adler to step in here, because people may not know that the AGA recently sent a letter to our foreign minister, and I'll ask Isi for his opinion on this in a moment. But David, do you want to just tell everybody what the background to this was?
Yeah, okay, Alan. On this specific point that Alan's raising, the New Israel Fund wrote to the Foreign Minister, Maurice Payne, in an effort to pressure the Australian government, or to lobby the Australian government, to take a stance against the extension of sovereignty that is being considered by the Israeli government into Judea and Samaria. Now, there's a whole variety of issues that arise from that. One observation is that, as Isi has explained, we have in place now, with all its faults, a broad unity government, which includes the Blue and White Party, it includes Labor, and one of its foundational platforms was indeed to do this extension of sovereignty, whatever that means. So the NIF is pressuring the Australian government to take a stance against the unity government of Israel, and it's a stance which is not just centre-left, it's extreme left on the political spectrum. So we decided to respond. We thought that an organisation that does have a reasonable base in the Australian Jewish community should respond. And we did our own letter to Maurice Payne, basically saying that they should resist and reject the approach to interfere with Israeli politics, interfere with an issue which has important implications for Israeli security. So that's where things stand, and that's the background to the letter. And I must say that the feedback that we've had has been outstandingly positive, that an organisation was prepared to stand up on this matter of principle and support Israel.
Yeah.
Well, look, I haven't seen the letter, and I don't know what the nuances are, but I certainly agree that it is a positive thing for any Jewish organisation to call on its government to support the view of the democratically elected government of Israel, which today is a unity government. And to that extent, of course, I agree with that, and I'm sure that most Australian Jews would agree with it.
Yes, Isi, one particular Jewish community leader once, he spoke at one of our Limud Odds events, and I remember him saying to the audience that to be a good Israel advocate, you have to be able to criticize Israel. And I asked him a question. I said, well, look, if I was, say, selling Coca-Cola, would I be telling my potential customers that, oh, by the way, it's going to rot your teeth? Wouldn't I leave that for my opposition. And so my question to you is, sure, you know, Israel's not a perfect society. Australia's not, America's not, but Israel's in a peculiar part of the world that does face extension. So should an Israel advocate really only be promoting the positive side of Israel and not the negative side? What do you think?
Look, promoting is one thing. Of course, you promote the positive side, but that should not exclude constructive criticism of non-security issues. For example, on the religious issues, there are problems that many Jews can legitimately in the diaspora say, we wish that this were different in Israel. And by the way, that would be reflecting the views of the majority of Israelis. But when it comes to security issues, I say it is outrageous. I say it's obscene for Jews who claim to be pro-Israel to be taking a line and calling on their government to go against what the majority of Israelis and the government are doing. And this has existential implications for Israel. I think it's a disgrace for any Jew to criticize Israel on security grounds.
Mm.
I think it's a disgrace.
Anybody else want to ask a question? Now's the chance. While they're thinking, Isi, let me just ask you, I get a bit worried when I look at the younger generation because I can see a shift in the way they're thinking, certainly in the diaspora here. And it seems to me that they've been brought up through a fairly left-wing education system, and they come out with all of this, you know, equal rights for everybody, so much so that they're not actually strongly advocating for a Jewish Israel. Does this worry you?
Of course it worries me. And I must say, there's a certain inevitability that the grandchildren of those who saw and witnessed the struggle for the establishment of the Jewish state, those who lived under anti-Semitism without a Jewish state when Jews were powerless, those who had relatives or acquaintances or were associated in one way or another, as many Australian Jews were, with the Holocaust. As generations grow up distant from that, it becomes more difficult. What should be done? I would say, make sure that your children at the least come and spend a year in Israel. Make sure that your children go on these tours of Europe to the concentration camps so that they can see their own eyes what they've seen, and above all, struggle to give them a Jewish education. Of course, bottom of all, I wish more of you would try, if you can afford to consider Aliyah, because this is a great country. We're going through the difficulties that everybody's going through in the world, although I think after Australia, we're second best off with this virus.
Yes.
But that's still a pretty terrible thing, being stuck in the house like many of you are. But I'm saying to you, consider Aliyah, and if not for you, for your children, because I can tell you one thing, every one of you, none of you can say to me, my great-grandchildren are going to be Jewish, because I'm willing to bet that even the best of you, you're going to have some fallout at the least. And they are lost to the Jewish community. And Israel has a grand future. And whatever your views are, you can express them in Israel. You can be as left-wing as you like in Israel. I mean, there are not too many of them because they've come to live with it and they know what it means. Look, we are willing, you know, tomorrow, Abbas could cut the whole business of sovereignty to pieces. All they have to say is, yeah, I'm ready to meet with you Israelis and negotiate. That's all that Trump has done, and he could drag that on, and then, God forbid, the whole thing just lapses. But he's got an obsession, as they all do. They are not interested in having a state of their own. They are not interested in anything other than seeing the end of Jewish legitimacy in this area. They are out to destroy us, because otherwise it would be negotiations on territory. This is not negotiations over real estate. You've had successive prime ministers, to their shame, offering more than they should have offered, and even that was rejected. And the last one was Olmert, who to my mind has turned out to be, if you read his columns in the Jerusalem Post, has turned out to be the most terrible politician Israel has ever created.
Yeah, I mean, Isi, what a lot of us hear is that when we talk about the resolution to the conflict, people say, oh yes, but it's the actual Palestinian Arabs are quite happy to live with Israel. It's their leadership that's the problem. What do you think about that?
You know what? I think to some extent they're right. I've undergone illness and I've had to be in hospital for a while. And I would like to invite anybody that criticizes Israel about apartheid to just drop in to either Hadassah or the Shavei Tzedek Hospital or any hospital in Tel Aviv and see for themselves. When I first went into hospital, I felt a little bit, I must admit, a little bit of prejudice when Arab doctors and nurses. But when the time I went out, I said, if we could live the way Jews and Arabs coexist in our hospitals, this would be a happy country. But for that, they have to have leaders who are not bastards and out to kill and hate Jews like the current leadership of the Arabs who pay people to kill Jews.
Yeah.
Isi, before we wrap it up, could you just tell our audience, what are you doing? Have you got any books coming out? Are you still writing your blog, Candidly Speaking from Jerusalem? Are you still writing for the Jerusalem Post? Just tell us a bit about what you're up to now.
I'm still writing for the Jerusalem Post, not as much, because my current state requires me to go to hospital 3 times a week for dialysis, which knocks you out a bit, but I'm still writing. But the main project I'm working on, or I'm not working on it, but Susan Rutten, the great historian of Australian Jewry, has been working for 20 years collating the documentation which are in my archives. And she has created an extraordinary biography of mine, which is now coming to the finalization stages. And I'm just going through it, fact-checking. It's an independent biography. It's critical of me in parts, but there's so much I've forgotten. And I must say, as you get older, I say to all of you who have had a public life, sit down with your children and get in front of a tape recorder and talk, because 10 years from now, you have forgotten a lot about it. Much of what appears in my biography, and I hope it will come out towards the end of this year, I've forgotten about it completely. I've been very fortunate to live a privileged life and be in the center of Jewish activities.
Yes.
And coming from Australia, a particular privilege.
Yeah.
My greatest event was living with those Soviet Jews who changed the world. Because I say that the revolution and Gorbachev would never have happened if it wasn't for the refuseniks and the extraordinary movement amongst Jews in the West. That was the last time Jews in the West joined up and did a proper protest movement. However, we could go back to those days today.
Yeah. Now we promised Isi that we wouldn't go past 9 o'clock our time, and it's only a couple of minutes to go. So I'd just like to ask the president of the AJA, David Adler, to sum up briefly and just let everybody know what's coming up in the next few weeks. David?
Thanks very much, Alan, and big thanks to you, Isi. We regard you as a wonderful resource for our community, and really want to thank you for the work you have done and the work that you continue to do. The sort of principled advocacy that AJA stands on includes a couple of the priorities that you mentioned. It includes providing, proper principled support for Israel. That's not always being uncritical, but that's where we stand. We provide strong support for Judaism to the best that we can, regardless of what one thinks of Trump's personality. As you mentioned, we have actually written and published our thanks to President Trump for some of the pro-Israel policies, recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, moving the embassy, Golan Heights, etc. We've had meetings with US Ambassador to Israel, David Freedman, and before he became Chief of Staff to President Trump, Senator Mark Meadows as well. So we've got some really good connections into the administration. For our group that's still here, I noticed we kept hitting capacity tonight. So during the week, we will upgrade the Zoom capacity for AJA for our future meetings. We have an extraordinary lineup over the next few weeks, and I'll just reiterate the two most immediate ones. Next week is Professor Ephraim Inbar, who's the president of the Jerusalem Institute of Strategic Studies, and we'll be focusing more specifically on the issue of extending Israel's sovereignty and both the political and security issues that arise from that. And the week after that will be our own Executive Director, Ted Lapkin, about his novel, Righteous Kill, a fantasy novel. Again, this is what the cover looks like. So it'll be like a virtual book launch. And finally, if you look in your chat box right now, if you're not yet a member of the Australian Jewish Association, please join. I've put a link there, and also on the website there's a donate page if you're able to provide us with some support. All appreciated. So thank you again, Isi Leibler, for an interesting discussion, and we hope we can continue to draw on your wisdom from time to time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Isi. Yeah, Isi, you're a living legend, and we love having you, and it's been fabulous. And thanks to Michael for putting a lot of work into this too. So on that note, we'll say good evening to everybody, and we'll see you all next week for another one of these sessions. Good night.
And stay safe.